Hello, Dan Goodstein here. I head up the Outsourcing Institute, and I'm joined by John Wilmot of Nelson Hall. In addition to leading the Nelson Hall organization, John is also chairing our upcoming digital BPO webinar series and keynoting the Outsourcing Automation Innovation Seminar series over the next few months. John, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you very much, Dan. Good to be with you.
So maybe for all those viewing, you could just do a brief introduction on your background, John.
Yeah, certainly. I'm CEO of Nelson Hall. We're a research and advisory firm covering a wide range of BPO and IT services. We were established in 1998, so we've been around a while. In terms of our business mix, our revenues are roughly equally split 50-50 between North America and the rest of the world. And we think we've got three things that makes Nelson Hall relatively unique. Firstly, we only use onshore analysts, largely US, UK, and France, and these guys do primary research themselves. So we don't ask vendors to write their own assessments. We actually interview the guys. Secondly, we provide a proprietary tool for screening vendors available to the buy side, which I think, besides giving you the objectivity I was referring to, actually helps you halve the time and cost of traditional vendor screening approaches in BPO and IT services. And finally, we try to be responsive and actively encourage our analysts to interact with you guys.
No, great. So, John, let's jump in. I'm hearing a lot about the end of traditional outsourcing models, if you will. Is it really the end, and why now? What do you see as the drivers?
Okay, there's certainly some changes going on, but no, it's not the end. It's an evolution. So you always get a lot of hype and people trying to do dramatic changes. It's not really like that at all. I mean, overall, companies tend to be reasonably highly satisfied with the delivery of existing outsourcing services. Now, that's not to say there isn't room for improvement, and we'll get on to that. But if I take just one of our recent sector studies as an example, that one gave 63% of organizations highly satisfied and only 5% actively dissatisfied. So that's really the start point. And there's about a third in the middle of it's okay, but we're not wildly excited about it. What's perhaps more interesting than the overall levels of satisfaction is the pattern of satisfaction. So typically companies are broadly satisfied with what I call traditional virtues of BPO. So, things like the caliber of the outsourcing delivery teams, the ability of the outsourcing to deliver improved process execution, a level of ongoing process improvement there, process standardization, those sorts of things. So outsourcing tends to largely tick the boxes with those. However, while buyers tend to be largely satisfied with the levels of, that vendors have met the levels of cost reduction that they were promised, they tend to be dissatisfied with the ability of outsourcing to reduce costs in absolute sense. So, yes, you've sort of done what you've said, but come on, there's a lot more there, isn't there? So there's certainly that feeling out there. And also, people don't feel that outsourcing has necessarily made a fundamental difference in changing the business outcomes achieved. So yes, process has improved, but it was incremental, rather than dramatic and fundamental. So, sorry, Dan, sorry. So, I mean, many of those drivers have actually, they're largely unchanged over the past decade. So, feeling that, cost base can go way beyond where it is, and that there must be innovative business models out there, and I can tap into them. Now,
yeah, so it's so that's what I was going to ask you. So you mentioned kind of the cost save, right? So digital is certainly a new buzzword, but I know you guys have done the research over the years, right? So is digital just another marketing tactic for the same old cost save conversation, or I think what you're saying is there are opportunities to really change how business is getting done.
Yeah, there's a lot more to it. Now, clearly, cost save is a very important part of digital. Not much works in outsourcing that doesn't have a cost save component to it, but there is much more to it in the case of digital. So again, it's generally been true that in order to save costs, you needed to do things better. cost reduction does have a high correlation with, faster turnaround times, which in turn has a correlation with increased customer satisfaction. So, I think I'd argue that digitalization is really bringing together three trends. So it's introducing non-voice and non-paper channels into both the front office and back office processing. So clearly, self-serve is much faster and cheaper anywhere it can be applied. And in the front office, things like chat are clearly cheaper than voice and more effective than voice as well. Second point is really, it's been a bit of a step change in terms of using platforms and tools such as RPA to remove some of the process joins and errors and make things flow more smoothly, without human intervention, get a bit closer to straight through processing, that sort of thing. And then I think that the third main strand is really using analytics and AI to improve processes more rapidly, both at the human agent level, human and virtual at the agent level, and at the corporate level. So, outsourcing was always good at incremental process improvement. You can now use some of the analytics and AI to actually make it much more real time and much more predictive. And then on the horizon, we've got things like the Internet of Things, tremendous potential to enhance ability to monitor and control devices. And so that is going to lead to fundamentally new business models in many sectors over the coming years. So I think trying to sum that up, digital does tend to be a bit of a catch-all, and it is something of a marketing phrase, but it's an important one, because I think the other strand behind this is that most of the buy-side companies as well, if only for their own marketing purposes, now want to be seen as modern digital businesses and to be, as fashionable, if you like, as some of the disruptors that we're seeing in the industry.
Yeah, and so one of the benefits is supposed to be better customer engagement, right? So are you seeing that, and can you share some examples of where you actually seen this happen?
Yes, I mean that's certainly happening. So I mean, let me put it into perspective a little bit. At the moment, we estimate that 21% of customer engagement is non-voice, i.e. digital. Now, within that 21%, though, there's actually 6% of that is email. Now, email is digital, but it's very old-fashioned digital, and it's actually being phased out in favor of the other channels. It's not responsive or immediate enough or customer-friendly enough. So, we've certainly seen that chat's been the fastest growing channel in recent years, and social and self-serve are growing in importance. However, I think one of the issues at the moment is that many of the channels tend to operate independently of one another, and there's still, by and large, not in all cases, but in most cases, there's still the challenge of actually integrating those channels and integrating the views of the customer, to get a view of the single view of the customer. And then, as we were saying before, ideally plugging analytics into it and all the rest. So what's quite new on here at the moment, I think where we're starting to see a lot more growth, almost beyond the chat, is into the self-serve. So can I get self-service in there? So to give you one example on that, one of the Japanese, I call them a consumer electronics manufacturer to make it a little bit vaguer, has put self-service into one of their new product lines, or one of the outsourcing vendors has done that. So they've created self-service support channel, they've automated web self-support, provided online support for, in addition to the self-serve, chat, video, email, and those sorts of things. Now, what they've seen in this particular instance is that 54% of the user clicks went through the frequently asked questions, i.e. the self-serve. 18% downloaded drivers to fix the device. 20% went through the video play. So, that's clearly taking an awful lot of, what previously would have been convoluted voice conversation out of the conversation. So not only is it making it cheaper for the company, but it's actually doing a lot to increase customer satisfaction at the same time.
Yep, makes sense. So, so John, you're chairing our upcoming webinar series, and the first webinar is really focused around optimizing processes, right? So why is this so important before transformation can really happen?
Okay, let me answer this one in a slightly different way. I guess there's always been a long-standing discussion in outsourcing about whether you optimize or transform processes before offshoring, or whether you're offshore and then you optimize or transform. And I think the balance there is fundamentally changing, or has fundamentally changed. Because in the early days, that journey to transformation was lengthy, expensive, and probably critically somewhat ill-defined. So it often made sense then to offshore first, and then use the cost savings over a relatively lengthy period of time to actually fund that transformation. The disadvantage doing it that way round was that it probably wasn't the speediest and most effective route to transformation. However, recently the balance has shifted in favour of doing that initial transformation followed by offshoring. I think that the major factor behind that is that we now, for many of the mature processes, we actually know what the roadmaps to transformation look like. And rather than going down a highly client-specific route and getting a feel for the process as you go, you know what to do pretty early on in the engagement. So, it's now much clearer roadmap, flight path, if you like, much shorter, much less expensive than it used to be. And it makes sense to actually fund that up front and get the results straight away. I think I'll give you another example on that one.
Please, yeah.
I guess that's particularly pronounced where it's a completely new way of working. So if we move on to something like BPAS as a standalone service, then clearly that's a major transformation. So it's platform enabled. On a good day, you've got analytics in it. You are totally fundamentally changing the way you do that process. So, and that's turning up in quite a few of the industry-specific processes now, at that sub-process level. So, things like mortgage origination, there's a fair bit of stuff out there. So you're doing it from scratch. You've got a platform in, what the new model looks like, you do it up front.
So, John, I assume some of the technologies that are coming out, related to some of this analytics, the automation, some of the process improvement, I assume they're changing the pricing models a great deal, and also the way clients are approaching governance, right? So how do you see this playing out?
Perhaps slightly more slowly than you'd think. Pricing models can be relatively slow to change. I was give you a really extreme example. I was looking at SOX outsourcing for a client earlier this week, and the pricing model that often made most sense there was simply price per man week, not even per FTE pricing. So there's still a fair bit of the old stuff lying around. Within the study I mentioned earlier, organizations are anticipating a sort of modest increase in gain share. And we have over the years, we've seen a steady shift from FTE-based to transaction or per unit-based pricing. And, with gain share, they're really being used to drive incentives and desired behavior. So very key role in that. Having said that, I think there are a couple of changes going on really in pricing. So, the first is that, pricing has often acted as a bit of an inhibitor in these, or ability to actually finance things midstream. So some of the more medium or larger scale technology adoption has often been inhibited just because it wasn't a contractual mechanism for agreeing how it got paid for, either by client or by vendor or whatever. So people need to be much more agile in their pricing to do that. I think it's now getting a bit easier to build that agility into some of these contracts because, if you take RPA and small forms of BPAS, they're relatively low investment thresholds. So, it's relatively easy for people to bolt that on and to agree funding for it compared to some of the massive investments in the past. Having said that, I think it's pretty important that you actually build that in up front. Even RPA can be a little bit like scary, when it's being applied to a contract that's near the end of its life and there's no provision for any additional spending in there whatsoever. So it's important to be agile and allow for probably a lot more smaller scale incremental spend than might have been in the case in the past.
So how disruptive are these trends really, John? Any predictions for the next 12 to 18 months, or advice to clients that are sort of the beginning of this journey?
Yeah, I mean, I think the disruptors are probably the same ones that I presented at the OI conference in 2014. They've moved on a bit, but it's mainly the same things. So, RPA has made a big difference in helping organizations, move beyond macros. And, it has added some steroids to continuous process improvement on legacy processes. And that's largely where it is now. And I think the vendors are much more advanced on that personally than many of the buy-side organizations. An interesting question backing onto that is, to what extent, and we're starting to see it a little bit, is RPA evolving to be used as a start point to build new operating models rather than a sort of fix for the existing one? So, will it replace workflow as that bedrock? There's a little bit of that reorientation starting to happen. AI, of course, is going to be massive, but it hasn't got there yet. It's starting to be used to a very small amount in customer service applications, initially in support of agents. But over the years, that's clearly going to move on to have much wider customer service applications and to underpin virtual agents and all those sorts of things. We talked a bit about the digital multi-channel earlier on. Still not there in terms of seamless transition between channels for the customer, single view of all the interactions for the agents. That's not there in any scale, but it's on its way. And that's going to make a very big difference to customer service, certainly over the next 3 to 5 years. BPaaS, big push within the industry, and traditionally, I mean, it's tended to be used in areas like F&A as part of this big wide-scale outsourcing contract to fix individual bits within it. What we're seeing much more appetite for now, and certainly where many of the vendors going, is really targeting individual pain points. So really at the process with a small p or the sub-process level, rather than trying to be all-encompassing. And we will certainly see a lot more of that over the next few years. And okay, we're on the start of IoT. It's not something for every sector, but if you're in automotive or healthcare, then you certainly need to take it seriously now. And then I think probably one of the things that tends to get a little bit missed out in some of these discussions, but arguably the most important, is analytics is becoming absolutely crucial, and it is becoming much more embedded and much more predictive, and actually helping you fix processes much more quickly in the past, helping agents make the right decisions or companies make the right decisions much more quickly. So I think that's critical. So I was trying to think of a catchphrase to sum that up in terms of advice, because the world is certainly moving away from those big all-encompassing outsourcers. So I thought probably as an extension of the think global, act local paradigm, maybe the equivalent in outsourcing now was think big, act small. I don't know if it quite works, but it was worth a try. I think the other thing is there is a lot of technology floating around at the moment. However, it's important to remember, as always, that technology is the means, not the end. And that technology looking for a problem to solve rarely succeeds. So think about your key KPIs. Think about what's your vision of what the organization will look like accordingly. You've got to have that roadmap and that vision of where you want to be. but then take lots of small steps to get there.
Great, John. Thanks for joining us today.
You're welcome. Good to talk to you, Dan.